Next, Boston Globe reporter Alison Bass recounts the consumer fraud lawsuit filed in 2004 by the New York State Attorney General against GlaxoSmithKline, manufacturer of the antidepressant Paxil. Ms. Bass reports that several sources claim the manufacturer suppressed research on the link between Paxil and suicidal thoughts. The event, hosted by Backpages Books in Waltham, Massachusetts, is 50 minutes.
Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming. My name's Alex Green. I'm the owner of Backpages Books here in Waltham. Thank you. Thank you. It is a pleasure to do this tonight. I think there's often talk about newspapers sort of slipping, and you forget the idea of a journalist as a household name, because I think people forget the idea of journalists who do good things, and they're out there. And seeing people come through the store the last few weeks, it's amazing how many people say they know Alison Bass. Alison has done extraordinary work for years. She's an award-winning journalist. She's a professor. She's a fellow graduate of Brandeis University with me. And she is the author of the extraordinary book, Side Effects, a Prosecutor, a Whistleblower, and a Best-Selling Antidepressant on Trial. I want to thank you all for coming, and if you'll join me, and please welcome Alison Bass.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was a lovely introduction, and I really appreciate your being here tonight. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces in the audience. At a reading I gave at Harvard Bookstore a couple of weeks ago, there were also a lot of friendly faces, but there were a number of people that I didn't know. And one woman, who was sitting right in the front row, stood up, turned around, and insisted that I read the back of her T-shirt. So I just want to know, does anybody want me to read the back of their T-shirt? Okay, all right, okay. Once we've got that out of the way. I'm going to talk a little bit about my book, its origins, and why the topic is so relevant today. Then I'll read a short passage from the book and open up the floor to take your questions. But first, let's start with a few facts. The drugs that are the focus of my book, the antidepressants, the SSRI antidepressants for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, have been blockbuster drugs since the 1990s, and they are still among the top 5 classes of drugs sold in the United States today. Antidepressant prescriptions for children and adolescents make up a large chunk of those sales, even though there is no evidence from clinical trials that they are significantly more effective than a sugar pill or placebo in treating depression in children and adolescents. As I reveal in my book, the makers of these antidepressants withheld negative information about the safety and effectiveness of these drugs. For instance, they withheld the fact that there is an increased risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviors in some people, children, adolescents, young adults, and adults taking the drug. And GlaxoSmithKline is currently being investigated by the United States Department of Justice for misrepresenting data in the very study that I write about in my book. And the members of Congress are also looking at some of the blatant conflicts of interest that, in my book, I contend have flawed our system of drug research. As I report in the book, the makers of antidepressants and makers of antipsychotics and other drugs paid millions of dollars in personal income, speaking and consulting fees, to researchers who were studying their drugs and touting their drugs in medical journals and at conferences. There are very few restrictions right now on how much doctors can personally earn from the drug industry, and even though they're supposed to disclose these conflicts of interest, many of them don't. So I first became aware, or I first began to get a sense of how flawed the drug research business is when I was a reporter for the Boston Globe in the in the 90s. It all started with an anonymous phone call from a woman who had left a cryptic message with the Globe City desk, something about the misappropriation of funds from a state mental health agency. As I was the Globe's mental health reporter at the time, I got the message. It was late in the day. I had just filed a daily under deadline, and I almost didn't return the call. But I picked up the phone, and a woman by the name of Donna Howard answered. Donna told me that she was Assistant Research Administrator in the Department of Psychiatry at Brown University, and that she had in her possession documents proving that the Chief of Psychiatry at Brown was collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars from a state mental health agency for research that apparently wasn't being conducted. She also told me that she suspected researchers in the department were misrepresenting data in 2 clinical trials, one involving Paxil for the treatment of depression in adolescents. I remember typing quick notes, the phone cradled to my ear, thinking, this can't be for real. Donna and I agreed to meet the next day at a Burger King on Route 24. She suggested the location because it was halfway between Providence, which is where Brown is located, and Boston. Donna said she'd be wearing a long navy skirt and had brown hair. I told her I was short, no news there, and would be wearing a red winter coat. Now, in my job as a reporter, I ventured into riot-torn ghettos, slipped into locked mental health institutions to investigate charges of abuse, and I've even gone undercover as a waitress in a restaurant to investigate labor violations at a place in Miami. So meeting a stranger in a Burger King outside of Brockton would be one of my less adventuresome outings, or so I thought at the time. Donna struck me as being very sincere, someone who had taken an enormous risk in meeting with a reporter that she didn't know. She told me she was a single mother raising a severely troubled child, and that she had come to work at Brown because she thought it was doing important research into the workings of the human mind. Everything Donna told me that morning was backed up by extensive documentation, and I filed a series of articles in the Boston Globe about research and billing transgressions by Martin Keller, Brown's chief of psychiatry. Then, in June 2004, when I read about the New York State Attorney General's lawsuit against GlaxoSmithKline, the maker of Paxil, I suddenly remembered what Donna had told me almost 9 years prior. Now, back then, I hadn't been able to pin down the allegations about the Paxil study, of which Keller was a principal investigator. But now it looked like the Attorney General's office had done it for me. So with a few phone calls, I discovered that the brainchild behind the Attorney General's lawsuit was a woman by the name of Rose Firestein, a newcomer to Eliot Spitzer's office. Thus, another remarkable woman entered the story. In suing the second largest pharmaceutical company in the world, Rose essentially took up the baton that Donna had hoisted. Now, it wasn't just the determination of these 2 women to fight for the public good that inspired me to write the book. I was fascinated by them. I wanted to know what compelled Donna to risk her job and speak out. True, she was planning to leave Brown anyway, but Martin Keller was a powerful man in certain circles, and he could make it very difficult for her to ever get a job in the mental health field again, if he so chose. Donna even had federal agents on her doorstep at one point, which is pretty scary stuff. I also wanted to know what motivated Rose Firestein to take on a risky legal case that had no precedent in New York State. In fact, up until that point, no state had dared to go after the drug companies for misleading physicians and consumers about the effectiveness of their drugs, in essence, committing consumer fraud. Not only was Rose new to Eliot Spitzer's office, but she was legally blind to boot. It was far from a foregone conclusion that her bosses would let her proceed with a potentially explosive case that could backfire at a very time that Eliot Spitzer was running for governor. What can you do? And I'll entertain questions about that afterwards. Anyway, how I had to change my epilogue at the last minute. Anyway, the more I delved into this case, the more I realized what a dramatic story that this would make.